Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week it became pretty clear that the main opposition group to the Trump administration is not currently the Democratic Party, which is mainly in disarray right now after splitting last week over a potential government shutdown. It's now in the courts and indeed the highest court of America, where some of the more dramatic actions of the newly re-elected President Trump are being scrutinised and, in some cases, halted or curbed. We saw frustration from Trump and his supporters at some legal interventions, leading to calls to impeach and remove from the bench judges that are standing in his way. That in turn led this week to an extraordinary intervention, a statement from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Conservative John Roberts, to the effect that an appeal to a higher court, not sacking the judge, is the correct remedy if you don't agree with one of their rulings. This was also the week where the Trump administration came the closest yet to openly defying a court order, when it failed to comply with a judge's ruling that plane loads of Venezuelans being deported to El Salvador be turned around. They were not, and the men are now in a notorious prison, some claiming they were falsely accused of being associated with criminal gangs in the first place. Lots going on, Chaz, and it seems as though we are seeing the courts gradually catching up with the fire and fury of Trump's first few weeks.
We absolutely are, and this was a big week in the development of the court's relationship with Trump, as you say. Firstly, as far as defying the court goes, I think they did everything but. I mean, the excuses they came up with for why they weren't explicitly defying the court, just they defied credibility. Saying things like, you had a verbal order and a written order, but we thought the verbal order didn't count. And, your orders don't count when the plane is over international waters. Yeah. If that's the case, then that means you can just murder people over international waters because courts don't give
them any ideas.
Anyway, so the fact they came up with such lame excuses suggests they are just one notch away from ignoring courts.
Yeah, and there is a bit of a sense as well that this is not just going right up to the line, but there are definitely people within Trump's orbit, if not administration, that are saying, there's no line, keep going, keep going.
There's a guy, Mike Davis, who is this far away from being the Attorney General. Right. He is a very prominent conservative activist who's explicitly advising Trump to just ignore courts. Have a look.
I don't say this lightly. I've never said this. They need to ignore this lawless order. We have our national security on the line. When you have these foreign terrorists who are invading America, they are raping, kidnapping, torturing, and murdering Americans. The president has a constitutional duty as commander-in-chief to get them the hell out of America.
Just to be clear, for those who aren't following the story closely, no one is saying you can't deport rapists and murderers and all those people that he's saying. The issue is, are these people who are being deported, not just are they rapists and murderers, but are they even members of the gang that the administration is saying they are? Because from what we're seeing in the court case at the moment, the very court case this is about, is that some of these people just happen to be in the same car as a gang member was when that gang member was arrested, or in the same house. There's no other evidence. Many of these people just had tattoos.
Right. Like most people under the age of 30 now tend to have.
And so you just go, well, like, this is why you have courts, to see whether people have committed those crimes they've been accused of. You don't just assert them.
And it seems this is a stretch because the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, which Trump is relying on for a lot of these deportations, I mean, it talks about, a country that you are at war with. And, it goes into the definition of what an enemy is, and Trump is trying to say, well, we're being invaded. So this rhetoric that he's been using for years about we're under invasion, etc., he's now trying to formalise that and to use war powers against a kind of a vague notion of undocumented workers, or even people who are documented workers, green card holders, but because they were at a pro-Palestinian rally, we're now going to deport them because they're enemies.
See, the thing is, I agree with you completely. The invasion logic is garbage, and I bet the Supreme Court doesn't let them have it, right? But I'm not even talking about that. I'm saying even if you accept all that, you still need to prove that someone's part of the invading army before you can apply the war powers to them. The Supreme Court has held that 1,000,000 times before.
You can't just say it.
You can't just say it. You need to be able to show it. And the courts do have the rights to review that, as much as the administration is saying they don't have the rights to review anything. I guess that's the other scary thing. The administration is saying the courts have no role to play here. What we say goes.
Yep.
And then when the court's asking questions about it, they're saying, we can't tell you, state secrets.
Yeah.
Like it's quite a scary area when it's not even a war at the moment.
And it feels like the courts, I mean, they're trying to catch up, but they are still, they're still kind of, they're like a cop chasing a robber down a street. They can see him at the end of the alleyway there. The decision this week about the constitutionality of effectively closing down the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and just the kind of farcical nature of, okay, the courts turn around and say, that thing that you have already done and has already had a material impact is unconstitutional. Well, tell that to the people who've gone hungry or possibly died, or whose HIV treatment was halted, or whose clinical trials were halted and can't be restarted. This is something that is like, oh, okay, it's unconstitutional. Well, our bad, already done.
Yeah, see, this is the context that this is all in, which is why the pressure is building up between the administration and the courts. Trump is losing so many cases at the moment. And it's not just liberal, super radical liberal judges like he calls them. I saw the numbers the other day. 82% of liberal judges are ruling against him. 82% of conservative judges are ruling against him. 86% of moderate judges are ruling against him. They're all ruling against him. But as you say, once the damage is done, you can't go back. An interesting court case this week, you mentioned USAID, there's an even bigger one. Elon Musk was found to be incorrectly appointed. Now, that case is not over. That's going to keep on going. But the judge appears to have made up their mind from the way they're talking. Now, if that's the case, that Elon Musk was incorrectly appointed, every single thing he has done in the last 2 months is unlawful.
Yeah.
But you can't go back. You can't undo all he's been doing, all the wrecking he's been doing.
Unlike a special counsel who, if you say they were illegally appointed, then the whole thing falls apart.
Well, it's literally exactly the same piece of legislation, legal theory, is exactly the same thing as happened to the special counsel, except for they hadn't started yet in the case of special counsel. And the other court cases, they sacked a whole bunch of probationary workers, like first-year workers. A court said, nah, you rehire them. Another one, the trans ban in the military, the judges just said, nah, you're leaving the trans people in the military. So this is all in the same week. All these court cases, some of them can be undone, some of them can't. I'm sure they'll be appealed. They're going to go up to the Supreme Court. But the fact is there's a lot of tension building between the Trump administration and the judiciary, and I think he's going to defy the judiciary openly quite soon. It's only been 2 months and we're already at this point. Yeah. I think it's going to get pretty ugly over the next
year. Some people think that surely we're not going to get to that point where there is open defiance of the judicial branch by the president and his administration. But then again, this is the guy that ignored an election result, ignored the 50-plus court cases that said he had lost that election, and created a constitutional crisis that in the end, he left office in January 2021, but we saw the terms under which he left.
The reason he hasn't defied them so far is because he's assuming the Supreme Court is going to be his buddies. Mm-hmm. When the Supreme Court starts finding against him,
right,
then he's going to start to find.
Yeah, and so therefore, in that context, interesting, John Roberts saying, cool your jets, although he didn't address his remarks directly to Donald Trump, and in a sense it was almost like maybe John Roberts was really talking to members of the Judiciary Committee rather than President Trump.
He was talking to Trump, don't worry about that.
Look, there are a lot of legal issues swirling around this week, to be sure. So for more on some of those, we're joined once again by Kate Shaw, Professor of Law at the University of Pennsylvania and one of the hosts of the Strict Scrutiny podcast. Professor Shaw, I wonder, in your view, how significant a rebuke was this of John Roberts when he effectively warned against trying to impeach judges? And what do you think he was trying to achieve in making that statement?
The Chief Justice made a very unusual statement, very clearly appearing to rebuke President Trump for criticizing on social media a district court judge who was presiding over a challenge to the Trump administration's summary deportation of a number of Venezuelan nationals to El Salvador, to a prison there. And Roberts essentially issued a statement after Trump accused the judge of being essentially a lunatic leftist and suggested that impeachment should be considered. Roberts responded that impeachment of judges because of disagreements with their rulings is not appropriate, that it's been settled for over 200 years that we don't impeach judges for those kinds of reasons, and that the remedy, if you disagree with a ruling of a judge, is to appeal. Look, it was a mild in tone statement, but it was a very significant act for Roberts to have waded into the discourse in this way at all.
Now, Professor, to this ruling in the last few days to partially restore USAID, there are a few of these kinds of court cases to rehire people at the moment, or to reopen parts of agencies that the administration's closed down. In reality, once someone has chainsawed their way through an agency, can it really be put back together?
These bells are hard to unring, absolutely. I mean, that's not to say that the litigation is unimportant or that these rulings against the administration are inconsequential. I think the lawsuits are really important, and I do think that there is some relief that these judges have awarded and can award to those parties aggrieved by what the judges are finding is the lawless action of some of the officials in the administration and in the entity DOJ. But of course, the premise of the question is exactly right. There are certain wrongs that cannot really realistically be remedied. Individuals who have already, say, relocated from posts abroad who were employed by USAID, programs that, this is some of the earlier litigation, but programs that were stopped and simply cannot be restarted. Food and medicines that actually were spoiled because delivery was unlawfully halted, right? So there are a lot of consequences of things that have been done that have been the subject of litigation that just are kind of beyond the power of the courts to remedy. But again, I do think it is nevertheless really important that these cases have been brought and that the rulings are coming down against the administration in the way that they are.
And Professor, are you seeing any evidence at this stage that any of these court cases are changing the way the Trump administration is going about trying to achieve their objectives, like getting rid of the education department? We're seeing it seems more of a sort of defund and downsize education now rather than simply trying to abolish it.
I do think that the lawsuits and also kind of the public response are all together having some effect. So you heard the administration early on basically announce that by executive order, it would abolish the Department of Education. The Department of Education is a creature of a statute passed by Congress, and only an act of Congress can abolish a creature created by Congress. And so I think that the combination of this string of losses in the courts and also the public's dawning realization that this administration is asserting the authority to do many things it actually doesn't have the legal authority to do is at least having some impact in the way the administration is choosing to carry out those objectives it hasn't, gotten around to yet and is just now getting around to. So I do think the fact that it sounds as though this executive order focuses on taking steps to wind down the Department of Education, right, reducing the size of it as opposed to purporting to, claim the authority to outright eliminate the existence of the Department of Education. So I think that is, to my mind, evidence that the lawsuits, and again, I think the larger responses outside of the courts are having some impact inside the administration.
And Professor, can we get your expert legal opinion on this big sort of question of the week, whether the Trump administration has actively defied a court by not turning around those planes, or was it enough to say, well, those deportation flights were in the air over international waters when the judge ruled, and, well, that's good enough?
I'm not aware of any principle of law really that gives any real kind of credibility to the argument that because the planes were over international water by the time, as the administration reports it, the judge issued his written order, that somehow relieved the administration from the obligation to comply, right? The individuals who were actually covered by the order were in the United States anyway. So I'm not sure it's an argument that does much work. I mean, they have an additional argument, which is there actually was another plane that hadn't even taken off by the time the order was issued. So they don't even have the international waters argument as to that. I think it's just one additional plane. They have a different argument there, which is that the individuals who were on that plane were being deported or rendered not under this 1798 statute, the Alien Enemies Act, but under the president's core constitutional powers, which was not something that the judge addressed, and thus this plane was not subject to the order. At least that is the argument the lawyers are making. I think it was these events, the administration's response to the judge's initial rulings in this case, certainly reflect an escalation on the part of the administration, which has come, I think, walked up to the line of outright defiance of court orders, but has not, I don't think, yet crossed the line. The judge has required some additional explanation from the government's lawyers, and they have a set of legal arguments, unconvincing though I think they are, about the inapplicability of the orders to the conduct at issue. And thus, I don't think we're yet at the point where the administration is saying to courts or to the public, we don't need to comply. Now, there have been some White House officials off the record who have said things like that. The Homeland Security Advisor, Tom Homan, said something relatively close to that. But the president, the attorney general, the Homeland Security Secretary, the Secretary of State, they have, again, I'm not at all suggesting that they have acted with the utmost kind of respect for the role and authority of the court, but nor have they engaged in what is, I think, outright explicit defiance. So I think we are closer to that line, but I do not think they have yet crossed it.
And Professor, we've finally seen a court begin to catch up with Elon Musk. If a court does indeed find that Musk was incorrectly appointed and therefore he's been acting unlawfully the entire time he's been in government, what are the ramifications of that?
They could be very significant. The administration could be told that much or all of what Elon Musk did while exercising this authority that the Constitution did not allow him to exercise, was unlawful, right, in excess of authority, and thus needs to be undone. Now, I think to your kind of back to your earlier question, that's not going to be feasible with respect to much of what DOJ has done, in that, individuals have already been targeted for layoffs, and contracts have already gone unpaid. I mean, there's been just an enormous amount of actual impact, and databases and private information has already been accessed. So you can't undo all of that. But I think that the court could require the administration to appoint Musk consistent with the Constitution, or, to direct him to cease exercising this authority. They can't tell him to stop talking to the president. And no one, by the way, is really objecting. The president is able to get counsel from anyone he chooses to get counsel from. And that's not a problem under the law or the Constitution. But that's not, I don't think, an accurate description, as we can sort of all see and read about, of what Musk is doing with respect to the administration right now. He's acting as an officer of the United States, directing underlings in the government to take certain actions. We basically know this from the president and from Musk personally. And that's not something the Constitution permits someone who is essentially a private citizen with this kind of special government part-time advisor status to do. And so I think the court could try to order the unwinding of much of what Musk has done, but also it could direct him either to be appointed properly or to essentially get out of government. And that would obviously be quite consequential. I suspect, for what it is worth, we're going to see some transformation of the nature of the position that Musk is occupying as this litigation proceeds, because I think the administration is realizing there are some deep flaws with the way that Musk has been exercising power, and they could, I think, try to moot the case by essentially announcing, well, his role has fundamentally changed and he's going to step back, so there's no live dispute before the courts for them to resolve.
Professor Kate Shaw, thank you for being with us on Planet America.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now to one of the sillier stories of the week. Trump and his allies questioning the legality of pardons made by President Joe Biden before he left office, because they believe that those pardons were signed by a device known as an autopen rather than being individually signed by hand.
Yes, this was a Heritage Foundation investigation. They noticed that if you compare the signatures at the bottom of Joe Biden pardons, we can have a look at the video right here, they match perfectly.
Dun, dun, dun.
And so they therefore concluded they haven't had anything confirmed that Joe Biden was using an auto pen to sign. Then Trump took that speculation, and he ramped it up, as he always does, by about 150%. The pardons that Sleepy Joe Biden gave to the Unselect Committee of Political Thugs, oh, nice nickname, and many others, are hereby declared void, vacant, and of no further force or effect, because of the fact that they were done by autopen. In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them. The necessary pardoning documents were not explained to or approved by Biden. He knew nothing about them, and the people that did may have committed a crime. Now, note,
huge if true, Chaz.
Yeah, all that stuff about Joe Biden not knowing what was happening, that's just his speculation on top of the Heritage Foundation speculation. So there's a lot of prove that, please, to begin with. But legally speaking, let me just tell you just the law on this, because it's actually very clear.
Right.
It turns out that you don't even need to have a pardon on paper. It doesn't require a signature at all. Right. In fact, Trump should know there was a court case involving him that went to the Supreme Court where he allegedly promised a pardon to a prisoner on the phone, and the court said, yeah, that's good enough. That is a pardon right there. Now, in the end, they said you got to be able to prove it, of course, like either be recorded or someone else has to overhear. So the pardon didn't go through in the end. But the fact is, signature doesn't matter. Right. Okay, so this is a complete furphy when it comes to
and even if it did matter, an autopen signature is as good as a physical signature.
It is. The Supreme Court has also held, because autopens have been around for a while. You know who invented that?
I'm going to say Benjamin Franklin.
Jefferson.
It was.
Yeah, they've been around for a long time.
Should have been Hancock. He was the signature guy.
Yes. But anyway, the Supreme Court's held and autopen is totally fine. The other thing, by the way, about this whole stupid story is that it's not even based on a reality, because those digital copies that the Heritage Foundation were looking at,
getting suspicious about.
Yeah. The reason they all have the same signature is because the National Archives stored digital versions with a generic graphic of a signature.
So it's not a scan of the original document.
No. So we have no idea whether Joe Biden physically signed or used an autopen or anything.
Is that because Trump would try and shove them down the toilet? If they
I'm not going to go there. But anyway, so that's the reason all the signatures look the same, because that's how the National Archives stores them. Trump's are exactly the same. So there you go. We've solved that one for you.
Yeah, myth busted. Well done. This week, President Trump did attend his first board meeting as the self-appointed chair of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. And it was there that he announced that he was delivering on a long-time promise to release all of the remaining classified files in the National Archives relating to the 1963 assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
We have a tremendous amount of paper. You've got a lot of reading. I don't believe we're going to redact anything. I said, just don't redact. You can't redact. But we're going to be releasing the JFK files, and that would be tomorrow. Do you have anything else to add to that, Carolyn? So that's a big announcement. They've been waiting for that for decades. Then I said during the campaign I'd do it, and I'm a man of my word. So tomorrow you have the JFK files. What time will they be released? Tomorrow afternoon, okay?
He was talking it up, and Trump admitted that he hadn't actually read any of the files, but he had, quote, heard about them.
It's going to be very interesting.
Very interesting. Well, that got the media's attention.
We are awaiting what's being touted as the largest release of files related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The classified files being released a few hours from now, a little more than a month after the FBI said it discovered thousands of never-before-seen records.
Much feverish anticipation. Reporters even rushed back to the scene of the crime.
Of course, people already come here on a daily basis because they're interested in the assassination of JFK. But now with the news today, it's been a buzz. Now, some historians are being cautious, saying that they're not expecting any major bombshell.
Let's look at the evidence and let's see what the evidence tells.
Good advice, man in the street, not a historian. 80,000 pages, though, is a lot to wade through. And they were pretty much dumped at random, not even in a searchable format. And when the president promised that there would be no redactions, that included a former government employee's social security number. He's still alive. Whoopsie. JFK Boffin scrolled through all of those pages, and so far nobody's claiming to have found a real smoking gun. It does look as though Lee Harvey Oswald Still did it, although there is more fodder for speculation about Oswald's links to both the KGB and particularly the CIA. And some of the Kennedy buffs out there are getting quite excited about Oswald's dealings with the head of the CIA counterintelligence unit at the time, James Angleton.
One document, FBI document released yesterday, indicates that Angleton recruited Lee Harvey Oswald as a 20-year-old Marine as a contact or a source for the CIA in 1959. Other documents released in recent years show that Angleton kept Oswald under surveillance, monitoring his politics, his personal life, his foreign travels, his contacts for the next 4 years, from November 1959 to November 1963. By November 1963, we now know, thanks to these documents, Angleton had a 180-page file on Oswald on his desk a week before Kennedy went to Dallas.
Interesting, sure, but contacting and watching Oswald, a known communist sympathiser, is not proof that he was a part of a CIA-run operation to kill an American president. It's more likely evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald was a known threat that wasn't being managed, and the secrecy and the redactions over the years have been about saving the CIA from embarrassment and possibly revealing some of their surveillance methods, such as they were. But no doubt that's more than enough evidence for those who believe the CIA was behind the shooting to prove the case. Which is probably why document dumps like this, Chaz, don't necessarily achieve very much. Yes, it's great for historians because it does add to the texture and the richness of their understanding as to what was going on, but it probably doesn't change anybody's pre-existing opinion. If you believe the official version of it, you now believe the official version of it. If you believe in a conspiracy, you now believe in a conspiracy.
Well, that's not unique to the JFK situation, that's for sure. Look, I mean, I'm glad that Trump released the documents. I mean, they should have been released a long time ago. It's kind of ridiculous it took this long.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's one of America's most vivid historical moments. It should be documented with 80,000 pages. That's great. I love that he's put out so everyone can see it. So I'll give him a big tick on there.
And this is the final 1%, basically. 99% of stuff was already out there. And there was a lot of speculation that, well, this stuff's being withheld. It must have a real bombshell in it. It's going to tell us that it was LBJ who was on the grassy knoll or something. So there isn't a bombshell like this from what has been gleaned so far. What about the significance of this, though, you know, when it comes to, I mean, clearly we're living in a time where a lot of distrust in government has led to a lot of conspiratorial thinking, including from President Trump and Elon Musk and those around them. And this, in a sense, this was the turning point. This is where people didn't believe the official line, start to believe in conspiracies.
That's absolutely true. And once again, I think part of it is the secrecy. I think they should release, I understand why you can't release documents like immediately, but I think they should get around to this much earlier than they do. That is this is the way you build trust, by being open and being transparent. Yes, nutbags are going to see whatever they want to see, but most people aren't nutbags, and they'll be reassured by the transparency. I think it's a good thing. And and I think back to what you were saying before, I do think that this is showing. From what I've seen, not that I've read the whole 80,000 pages, but from what I've seen on Twitter at least, it does seem to suggest that it's the thing that's been most covered up is the CIA really dropped the ball.
Right.
That there were all kinds of warning signs about Lee Harvey Oswald and about connections to Russia, and they kind of did nothing. Even though they had explicit. Back in July of that year.
So the cover-up was the CIA covering up their incompetence rather than their complicity in the whole thing.
I think so, but the point you made, I thought there was no conspiracy beforehand, so I still think there's no conspiracy.
Right, exactly. Well, if the JFK files were perhaps the most overcovered story in the media this week, this could have been one of the more undercovered ones. As a part of the Trump administration's purge of diversity, equity and inclusion programs across government and wider society, Arlington National Cemetery began wiping from its websites histories highlighting Black, Hispanic and women veterans. National Public Radio reported this week that articles, photos and videos seen as promoting DEI are being removed under this new approach. Then Axios reported that articles about the renowned Native American code talkers from the Second World War had disappeared from military websites. Several broken URLs were now being labelled DEI. Military newspaper The Stars and Stripes reporting that a page celebrating Private Ira Hayes, a member of the Pima tribe, who was one of the 6 Marines photographed in that iconic image of US personnel lifting the flag on the island of Iwo Jima in 1945, that article had also been erased. To many, this appeared like a pretty sinister and sickening erasure of history, a digital book burning, if you will. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell was asked whether this crackdown on DEI might ultimately adversely impact recruitment efforts. He maintained that removing the focus on diversity was actually about promoting unity.
The President and the Secretary have been very clear on this, that anybody that says in the Department of Defense that diversity is our strength is frankly incorrect. Our shared purpose and unity are our strength. And I say this as somebody who led a combat platoon in Afghanistan that was probably the most diverse platoon that you could possibly imagine.
Okay, but then came an apparent and pretty rare back down from the Trump administration. Stars and Stripes reporting that web pages celebrating legendary minority troops are being restored after having been scrubbed from the site. So, what is going on here? Well, we really don't know, Chaz. We don't know if these articles are going to be all reposted, altered in some way, whether it's going to be more sort of surgical whitewashing, or whether it's going to go back to the way it was. We don't even know what it was that was going on in the first incident and what impact this is going to have, because we also know that people outside the realm of government, private companies, are getting rid of their DEI policies, their stories of diverse personnel on their own website. So this does become quite, infectious, if not pernicious.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Just quickly, just take one thing that you mentioned in passing there, the military recruitment. Military recruitment is very strong at the moment. So if this is
that what you will.
Yeah, that's right. If this is hurting it, then it should be it should be massive, because they're actually going pretty well. But I mean, Trump is the guy who said that he gave us back free speech, and then you have all this censorship is just ridiculous. It's such hypocrisy.
He's the guy who's been saying you can't even get rid of statues of Confederate generals who fought against the United States because that is erasing history. And he's going, click, delete.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, I do think there's probably a bit of AI going on here.
Yeah.
I think that at times there's also a bit of what they call catastrophic compliance, where when people don't like what you're getting them to do, they go over the top to go, oh yeah, how you like this? How about we get rid of the Enola Gay? If you don't like the word gay,
right?
Like that kind of stuff. I think there's probably a bit of that going on, but the bottom line is, I don't think they should be censoring anything. They want to be doing their censoring. We're guarded by the fact that a lot of these digital copies are backed up. In 4 years' time, restore.
Yeah, there is that. But I guess also in the meantime, even if these articles are mostly being reposted, you can be pretty confident that they're not out there commissioning new articles about Jackie Robinson or the Navajo Code Talkers. Because they're just not going to be given money to do that kind of thing. Atlanta-based journalist and political commentator Sharon Reed spoke to me a little earlier, and I began by asking her what she thought when she first heard about these websites being purged of these stories of diversity.
Well, it's more of the same. The digital version of erasing history. We've seen it before in America, whether Black soldiers left out of Civil War memorials or the Tulsa race massacre buried for decades, really 100 years. And now it's happening online, and it's deliberate. And my thoughts are, if you can erase the story, you can erase the struggle. And let's not forget that it's doing ongoing harm to Americans. And I really thought about it, this willful destruction of our rich historic struggle. And yes, a painful struggle at times, but despite all America has left to do, we did get it right sometimes over the course of history. When pushed to the brink, we learned and chose a better path. And this is like moonwalking all of what we worked so hard for back.
Among the stories that were taken down were stories of Native American Marine Ira Hayes, General Colin Powell, baseball star Jackie Robinson's wartime experience. So many crucially important stories.
Well, you mentioned Colin Powell, for example, and all those great men. Jackie Robinson was on that site because he served proudly, but he wasn't part of DEI, and neither was Colin Powell. These were our best and brightest who, despite America's ongoing push and pull with bigotry and racism, stood by and stood proud and rose to the top. They weren't there because someone had a policy to put them there. They were there in spite of America's history of racism. So those really jumped out at me, and I thought to myself, they're the opposite of this, I believe, false narrative of diversity, equity, and inclusion is bad for America. They're the best and the brightest that worked for it, earned it.
And Sharon Reed, do you have a sense even as to why this was able to happen? Was it a vindictive person? Was it a mindless but presumably pre-programmed AI system that just hunted out the word diversity? What was going on?
That would be getting into the mind of people that I just inherently don't understand. I will say this, can I choose both? It's stupid, but also deliberate. It's a less plausible argument when you then go back, as they did with Jackie Robinson and some of the others, and put it back on the site. It's like, I don't agree with anything that you're doing, but in a real argument that doesn't sway and pivot with the wind, it might be just a grain easier to take in if you didn't so easily walk it back. And that's what we're seeing here. So I don't know if it's stupidity, make it up as you go, whatever you have it. But I do know that it's just not a plausible argument. I'm someone who loves to be presented with a sound argument. I love to pick it apart too. Where do we start with this? It's nonsense.
There was, Sharon, an understandable outcry over this week, and we understand reportedly a lot of these stories are now being reposted to various websites. So in your view, is that it? Is this story over?
Not at all. I would suggest it's much like my last response. If you really were hell-bent on something, if you believed it with your full being, your full core, why would you reverse it? I'm pleased, I guess, that you did, still disgruntled that you messed with these incredible heroes in the first place, this true accounting of history in the first place. But at the end of the day, if this is what you really believe, I can respect that you believe it, even if I don't respect it. So no, it doesn't solve the problem. It just leaves people more confused and with the understanding that making it up as you go, you don't really even believe this stuff. You just are rooted in racism and bigotry, and that's what you want to lead with.
Pentagon officials do say, Sharon, that this is not an act of racism against anyone. This is a matter of unity in the armed forces, and that somehow diversity equals divisiveness. What do you think of that idea?
Absolutely not. Okay? It doesn't mean those who are pushing this haven't been indoctrinated. They have, but our real history corrects the record. We have a record here that's real. The same arguments they made against integrating the military in 1948. They said diversity would weaken the force until Black soldiers went to war for a country that didn't believe in them and proved them wrong. They didn't want to rely on the Tuskegee Airmen. They did because they had unique skill sets that protected and served this country's interests. They were quite literally specialized, the cream that rose to the top. How is pushing the lie that under that scenario they are inherently viewed as less than helping unify soldiers? It's not.
Over many generations, Sharon Reed, we have seen different forms of resistance to racism, from marches to sit-ins at lunch counters, refusing to give up seats on buses and so on. What does resistance to the whitewashing of American history look like to you?
I think it's never tiring. They got all the energy in the world and right now significant power and resources. But everyday people can tell the truth. Just keep telling the truth out loud. Don't give up. Don't be defeated. And it's not easy when you're under threat. There's some real Americans millions, if you look at some of the policies that are being pushed right now, who are under threat. But to me, resistance is about standing up, being counted. I'm a Black woman in America. I'm other things too. But right now it's important to say, look at me. I'm not less than you. I belong. I have gifts to offer. Keep speaking truth to power. I think that once you give that up, your voice, you might as well give up everything.
Sharon Reed, really great to get your perspectives. Thank you for joining us on Planet America.
Thank you.
And that is just about it for another trip to Planet America. We're going to be back on Wednesday, April the 9th on ABC TV and Friday the 11th here on ABC News with a few fun changes to the program as well, Chaz.
Yes, we're going to be leaving the Foval office behind.
Oh, goodbye, fake desk. Bye, fake television.
And we're going to be heading downstairs to the Situation Room.
How tremendously exciting that is. Now, traditionally, Chaz, in the 13 years of Planet America, whenever we take a program break because of the Melbourne Comedy Festival or Christmas or whatever it might be, usually America goes to hell in a handbasket. Somebody's shot or impeached or something happens. We don't know what we don't know, but as for what we do know in the next couple of weeks, what should we be keeping an eye on?
Well, we know one thing is definitely going to be happening in the next 2 weeks, and that is what Trump calls Liberty Day.
That sounds good.
Which pretty much every economist in America calls Help Day.
This is about the tariffs.
This is the tariffs. This is the big tariff day. They've been working towards these for months, where there are, there's like 177 countries or whatever out there. There are literally thousands of different products from each of those countries, and every single one of them is going to have a different tariff rate based on what those countries do to America, supposedly. And that all is supposed to happen on April 2, the Wednesday before we come back, right in the middle of our break. So who knows? Trump might change his mind after...
It's been known to happen.
After 6 hours, or he might throw the entire country into chaos. There's a little bit of a vibe of, I'm not sure if you remember Thelma and Louise, the last moment where, let's just say, America is the car and Trump is Thelma and Louise. There's a little bit of that vibe driving off the cliff.
Who's Brad Pitt in this scenario? That's Elon, right?
I'll be Brad Pitt.
Okay, good casting.
But yeah, there is a lot of concern and trepidation about exactly what April 2 will bring.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say after, 8 weeks back on air since the final couple of weeks of the Biden administration, it has been a very, very hectic period of time. I'm going to try and take the advice that I give to a lot of Planet America viewers that I meet. You can sort of unplug a little bit. You can step back. We do encourage you to watch this show once a week, but I'm going to focus on a few other things and then just check back in on what's happening, maybe once or twice a week, that kind of thing. Not too much.
Check it out on Liberty Day.
Yeah, I sure will. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here really soon. Bye-bye.